You are most welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Real Impartation Moments on Tuesday Night Anatomy with Daniel Okwan. Today's section, I take you through an aspect of the anatomy of the thorax. My friends, already I have several videos regarding the anatomy of the thorax, okay, that you can, go in and of course watch. So my friends, if you want any video regarding the anatomy of the thorax, there are several videos there. So you can go into the playlist and get the relevant video and watch. But my friends, today I bring to you an aspect of the thorax which students, most students in their reading, they tend to get confused with it. And that is why it is my job as the noted anatomical prophet to take you through these things to ensure that your anatomy, becomes very easy for you. My friends, today I take you through some important neurovascular structures, which run in what we call the intercostal, spaces. Yes, that's what I want to take you through. So it's going to be an aspect of the anatomy of the intercostal space because I'll be dwelling, mainly on some important neurovascular structures. And those important neurovascular structures I'm talking about the intercostal arteries and of course the intercostal nerves. Okay, these are the things that I will take you through today. So some aspects of what we call the intercostal space. Intercostal spaces. Now my friends, I want you to answer it wherever you are, that how many intercostal spaces do we have in the human body? Now, for us to appreciate that, the first thing I want you to know is that whenever we talk about the word costal, whenever you hear the word costal, then it got to do with the rib. Yes, that's a rib. So the ribs can also be called costal bones. So whenever I'm having any two ribs, adjacent ribs, then what happens is that the space in between these ribs can therefore be called intercostal space. So there are intercostal spaces. Now for us to know the number of intercostal spaces that we have, then you got to answer this one for me. That how many pair of ribs do we have in the human body? On either side of the body, how many ribs do we have? So I'm sure you will tell me that we have 12 pairs of ribs. So if I just focus on one side of the body, then what happens is that on one side of the body, I'm going to have 12 ribs, which tells me, and we are saying that in between the ribs, there will be a space, that's the intercostal space. So we are having 12 ribs on a side of the body. So how many intercostal spaces are we going to have? Yeah, do the mathematics. And I'm sure you come out that we will have 11 intercostal spaces. 11 intercostal spaces. That's what we are going to see. Now, having seen that we are going to have 11 intercostal spaces, now within these intercostal spaces, we have some neurovascular structures which traverse these areas. Yes, and that's an important thing I want you to know. There are some neurovascular structures which traverse the intercostal spaces, and therefore these neurovascular structures will therefore be called intercostal, vessels and of course the nerves. Intercostal vessels and of course nerves. And normally, there's also one question that what is the arrangement of these intercostal nerves and vessels, in the intercostal space? And your answer is going to be the normal arrangement of the neurovascular structures over there is Van in craniocaudal direction. The answer is Van. And the V over here represents vein. A is for artery, N is for nerve. What sort of arteries, veins, and nerves are you talking about? Intercostal vein, followed by intercostal artery, and of course intercostal nerve. That's what we are talking about. But my friends, before I move on and teach you the main thing for today, what you have to know is that in the intercostal space, this is what we see. Vein at the cranial region, followed by the artery, intercostal artery, and then the intercostal nerve. But there's a catch. My friend, there's a catch. Because what happens is that in the first intercostal space, that's what the arrangement in craniocaudal direction. Rather, it's going to be nerve. So except the first intercostal space, Why? Because in the first intercostal space, it is rather going to be nerve, artery, and vein. In the first intercostal space, that is what we see. Yes. So rather, we are going to have the intercostal nerve, followed by the intercostal artery, and of course, the intercostal vein will go at the caudal region. That's what you see. I want you to know this catch. Now, the main thing that I'm talking about today is for us to appreciate that how many intercostal spaces do we have. And already we know the answer, that we are going to have 11 intercostal spaces. Then the next question that comes is that how many intercostal arteries do we have? Yes, I'm sure you also tell me that we are going to have 11 intercostal arteries, no problem. But one thing I want you to become aware is that these intercostal arteries, we have some which will be running the posterior aspect of this intercostal area. So let me show you that. What I'm trying to say is that this area, okay, from the dorsal aspect, I can see the ribs, the vertebrae over here. Now what happens is that they will be emerging from the posterior aspect, okay, and then they will be running, coming towards the anterior aspect. But they will end at the level of this joint. And I'm sure you know that these ribs, okay, they articulate directly or indirectly with, of course, the sternum, by way of costal cartilages. These are costal cartilages. So at the joint over here, between these ribs and the costal cartilages, is something we call costochondral joint. Yes, you know these things. We did it in the first year. I have all those videos there. So these are the costochondral joints. So from the posterior aspects and the costal spaces, the arteries will be coming till this level. Now what it means is that beyond this costochondral joint, medially, we are supposed to have, yes, intercostal arteries over here too. Okay, that's one thing I want you to know. So the intercostal artery, which will be coming from the posterior aspect all the way till the level of the costochondral joint, we call these intercostal arteries posterior intercostal arteries. Posterior intercostal arteries. Now already you told me that we have 11 intercostal spaces. Therefore it means that we have 11 posterior intercostal arteries. Yes. Now how about the anterior intercostal arteries? Yes. You have an intercostal artery over here at the level of the costal cartilage, yes, beyond the costochondral joint, yes, all the way. But how many do we have? My friends, we are not going to have 11. We rather have 9 anterior intercostal arteries. Now, what's the reason? Now, when I raise this one a bit for you to see something, what you realize is that, yes, this is, of course, this is the first intercostal space, okay, anteriorly. Second, third, so the artery will be running. Fourth, fifth, sixth, yes, seventh, eighth, and then ninth. Now, what happens is that for that of the 10th and then the 11th space, we don't have the costal cartilages are there, but they don't reach the level of the sternum, whether directly or indirectly. And that is why we do not have, arteries by way of anterior intercostal artery for, of course, the 10th and of course the 11th spaces. That's what I want you to know. So we have, what I want you to know is that we have 11 posterior intercostal arteries, but 9 anterior intercostal arteries. Now, let us look at these intercostal arteries in detail. Now, for the posterior intercostal artery, now let me just sketch out something for you, and then we take it from there. Assuming I am looking at this is my sternum, okay? Now let's say I have the sternum over here. And so on. Now I'll come down, I'll draw the other ones later. But for now, look at this. Assuming I have the first rib, okay, I'm interested in, assuming not necessarily the first rib, let's say I have a rib, let's say I have another rib over here. Let me make this one a bit larger to illustrate something. Now, one thing I want you to know, okay, is that if I look at the posterior, the region, okay, the area which will be supplied by the posterior intercostal artery in this intercostal space, you see that it's quite wider, okay. So vast majority of what we call the intercostal space will be supplied by the posterior intercostal artery, just a little bit, okay, will be supplied by the anterior intercostal artery. That's the first thing I want you to know. So assuming the sternum, so it means that those are the medial aspects, and as I go this way, I'm going lateral and of course posteriorly eventually. Where I have, so it means that these areas, these are the costal cartilages. This is what I'm trying to show, costal cartilages, and these are the ribs. I'm trying to use this one to be the costochondral joints, okay, over here. Now, for the posterior intercostal artery, what we will see is that mostly, whenever we ask you, where do we have the posterior intercostal arteries originating from or arising from? Mainly your answer is, of course, the descending thoracic artery. Descending thoracic artery. That's mainly your answer. But with the exception, there's an exception, I will tell you that one. So let's see. Now, I have this to be my, let's say this. Let's say there's an artery, and mainly it's going to be the the descending thoracic aorta. Okay, so I want you to put that one down over here. That this artery can be that of aorta. Descending thoracic aorta. That is for the third. Okay, I want you to know that for the third to the 11th posterior intercostal arteries. It will be giving off all these branches. Okay, third to that of the 11th. Okay, so then the question is, how about the first? Okay, I want you to know that for now. How about the first? The first will actually be coming from something we call supreme. Or the highest intercostal artery. Okay. Now, this supreme or the highest intercostal artery actually arises from something we call the costocervical trunk. Okay, I want to tell you that it arises from the costocervical trunk. I'll put that one down. But for now, what I want you to know is that that one is going to give us that of the first and second posterior intercostal arteries. Okay, so the supreme intercostal artery, what I want you to know is that the artery which will be given, rise to this one, okay, the branch of which artery will give us the supreme intercostal artery, and your answer is costocervical trunk. Costocervical trunk. And even this costocervical trunk is actually coming from something called second part of the axillary artery. It's actually coming from the second part of subclavian artery. Second part of subclavian artery. Okay, that is what I want you to know. So the first thing that I want you to become aware is that the posterior intercostal spaces, the arteries run over there, mainly they will be coming from the descending thoracic aorta, branches of the descending thoracic aorta, except that of the first and second, which will be coming from where? The highest. So the highest we call it supreme intercostal artery. Supreme intercostal artery. And my friends, the supreme intercostal artery is actually a branch of the costocervical trunk, which in turn is a branch of what we call the second part of the subclavian artery. Okay, that is what I want you to know. Now, all these videos, I've done them. Yes, kindly go and get all these videos and of course watch it. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, assuming this is, let's say the aorta, whichever, then what is going to happen is that this artery, now what do we have over here? This becomes a space. This is an intercostal space. So I have a branch coming all the way this way, supplying till where? Till the costochondral joint. Okay, till the costochondral joint. And then even, so what do you think is the name of this artery? This artery is posterior intercostal artery. Posterior intercostal artery. But this same posterior intercostal artery gives a branch which runs with it, so we call it collateral, it moves with it. So this artery, even in turn, gives off a branch which goes caudally, also ended at the costochondral joint. And that is why this one will be called the collateral branch of course, this posterior, intercostal artery. Now then the question is, how about the anterior intercostal arteries? How about that one? My friends, for the anterior intercostal arteries, one thing I want you to know is that I will draw it again and show you, because this time around, it will not be coming from this. As I told you, the supreme intercostal artery is coming from costocervical trunk, which is coming from the second part of the axillary artery, subclavian artery. This artery I'm going to talk about is actually coming from the first part of what we call the subclavian artery. And my friends, this artery is what we call internal thoracic artery. And because, especially in females, it gives some supply to the mammary gland, okay, some perforating branches, we call this artery internal mammary artery also. Okay, so that is one thing I want you to know. And this artery will be running, okay, it will be running deep, okay, to the costal cartilages in here, deep over here, just lateral to, of course, the sternum. That is what we are going to see, just lateral to, of course, the sternum. And for this reason, that is why we are calling it internal thoracic artery. So let's say I have an artery running in this manner, in this fashion. Okay, this artery is, of course, the internal thoracic, is running inside the thoracic region, or something we may also call internal mammary artery. Mammary. My friends, this internal mammary artery, okay, is that one which is supplying. So it is going to give off some branches, okay, as it runs this in this area. As I told you, to be coming from where? The first part of subclavian. Artery. Okay, so it will be giving off, as it runs over here, it will be giving off some branches, also till the point of the costochondral joints. So what sort of arteries are we talking about over here? These are what we call the anterior intercostal arteries. Okay, so that they are going to anastomose with the posterior intercostal artery and, of course, the collateral branch at the level of the costochondral joint. That is what we see. Yes. Okay, now one thing is that I'm talking about internal thoracic artery, but it's supplying which number of spaces? I told you that for the anterior, we are going to have 9 intercostal arteries. Now, the branches, okay, by way of the anterior intercostal artery, the first, now those ones which will be coming from this internal thoracic artery is actually the first 6 intercostal anterior intercostal arteries. First 6. Now, how about the remaining 3? The remaining 3 will be coming from a branch of the same internal thoracic artery, which you call it musculophrenic. Okay, so the remaining 6, I'm going to draw to show you those ones. Remaining 3, by way of course, the 7th, 8th, and 9th anterior intercostal arteries, okay, will be coming from what we call the musculophrenic artery. Okay, that is one thing I want you to know for now. And so finally, for us to also understand these things better, it will be useful if we treat, okay, this artery briefly by way of the internal thoracic artery. Look at the branches. I want you to know that one also. Good. So let me briefly take you through the internal thoracic artery. This is worth studying because last week when I told you certain things, okay, I mentioned some arteries. Now we are going to appreciate those arteries better over here. Now, so you draw it the same way as I'm going to draw it. Let's take it that I'm having my I'm drawing the stem once again. Now, I have, there's a rib, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, say 6, and of course the remaining ones should be joining by way of the other floating ribs, by other false ribs, okay, there. Okay, good. So let us look at these ones. Okay, so I have this, just one side only. Okay, so this is the stem margin. I have my mandible around over here. And then the body, then I'll have my xiphoid process around here. Now, let's take a close look at this. What have we seen so far? Now, I told you I'm interested in showing you something about this artery. Now, from the second part, assuming that I have the subclavian artery over here, subclavian artery. But precisely which part? I'm talking about the first part. Now, whenever we talk about the first part, okay, it is that one, okay, which we are talking about, that becomes, of course, our proximal part, okay, the first part of the subclavian artery. And that one, we are dividing it into 3 parts with the help of a muscle, the scalenus anterior muscle, okay, that's the one which is helping us. Now, from the first part of the subclavian artery, we see an artery which is coming out, and that is the internal thoracic artery. So initially it comes downwards, then it comes a bit medial, just lateral to, of course, the sternum. Then it begins to go downwards, running deep to the costal cartilages. Now, let's count the number of, so as it runs through, what is going to happen? It's going to give off these anterior intercostal arteries up to the level of the costochondral joint. Now, the same way, okay, throughout. Now, let's look at it. There's the first intercostal space, second, third, fourth, fifth, and then I am interested in the sixth intercostal space because I told you that it will be supplying, giving off all these branches, anterior intercostal arteries, to the first 6 intercostal spaces. And that is why at the level of the sixth intercostal space, this artery will divide. This artery will divide into 2. So this artery will be having some kind of terminal branches. Yes. Now for now, let's look at the branches coming from this, internal thoracic artery. What are those branches that we are going to talk about? Number 1, we've seen that it will be giving off all these anterior intercostal arteries. But you need to be mindful which up to what level. We are talking about the first 6 anterior intercostal arteries. That's what we are talking about. Now, as this artery moves down, it's going to give off some kind of 2 terminal branches. This will finally give off 2 terminal branches. Now, one of them is over here, which runs along the costal margin. Now over here, this is the costal margin. Okay, costal margin. Now because it's divided at the level of the 6 costal cartilages, then it means that the remaining 3 anterior intercostal spaces, by way of the anterior intercostal arteries, will be coming from, of course, this artery which will be running along the costal margin. And what's the name of that artery? This guy over here, we call it musculophrenic artery. This artery over here is known as musculophrenic artery. Very important because, as I told you, this musculo, so there's another branch, musculophrenic artery. Okay, so it will be supplying all some of these muscles in the intercostal space, and not only that, okay, you can see the word phrenic. Then what it means is that, as I told you, to be supplying, anything phrenic has to do with the diaphragm. Be supplying some aspects of the diaphragm also. Musculophrenic artery. That's what we saw last week. Now, there is a third terminal branch, and this is that branch. Now, this branch too. Now look at it. It is just as now. We have another copy over here, but I'm not showing that one. It will be running through a foramen over here, which is just when I drew the diaphragm, I told you that there were major and minor openings. There was some kind of minor openings around where we have the xiphoid process, the costal origin of the diaphragm. You remember that? We talked about it, that it had an eponym, foramen of Morgani. Foramen of Morgani. Otherwise, something we call sternocostal triangle. If you remember that, this is the foramen of Morgani. Foramen of Morgani, which of course we also call it sternocostal triangle. If you remember that, sternocostal triangle. Now from the foramen of Morgani, now you know the xiphoid process. Then from there you are going to the region of the abdomen, and in the abdomen, around the midline, there's a muscle. And what's the name of that muscle? Rectus abdominis muscle. I've done all those videos. Rectus abdominis muscle. And this muscle is in a compartment, it's in a sheath, something we call rectus sheath. Yes. And this, artery will also be running through the rectus sheath, actually running behind or deep to what we call the rectus abdominis muscle. This is that artery, and that artery is something we call Let me put it over here. We call it superior epigastric artery. Superior epigastric artery. So that's the third branch of this, internal thoracic or internal mammary artery. Now, the fourth one, okay, is that now, as this artery runs, okay, as this artery runs, now these we have the pulmonary cavities over here, where people may call it pleural cavity. Now, in the region, on the midline over here, we have what we call the mediastinum. As these arteries are coming downwards, they may give off some branches we call mediastinal branches. Okay, it will be running in the superior, mediastinum. It will go in the anterior mediastinum, and that is why in the anterior mediastinum of the inferior mediastinum, the main thing over there is the thymus, which of course will involute with time. Okay, for this reason, it will give off mediastinal branches. Okay, over there. Now, in females, then we have, especially in females, because their breast is very substantial, then we have some branches, we call them perforating branches. Okay, so we have perforating branches in females, we have perforating branches. Yes, precisely, we are talking about mammary branches. Okay, perforating mammary branches. Okay, actually within the second to fourth intercostal spaces. Okay, that is what we are going to see. Now, there's a sixth branch that I'm going to tell you is very important, because last week I told you something about it. Now, the sixth one, which is also a branch of what we call the internal thoracic or internal mammary artery. Okay, now this artery is that one which runs with the diaphragm, with the phrenic nerve, and so we call it pericardial pool. Sometimes we may also call it pericardiophrenik artery, pericardiophrenik or pericardiacophrenic artery. That is what we see. Now, I want to show you something briefly about this one. Okay, so let me take this one and then draw something to illustrate it to you. If you want to appreciate the structures which are supplied by air, we draw, the heart again. Now, you remember last week I drew the heart. Now this is the diaphragm. Here there's an opening for the inferior vena cava, major opening over there. Now what we've seen is that we have this nerve which will be running over here this way, running through the same foramen. And what's the name of that nerve? This is the right phrenic nerve, but the left phrenic nerve runs along the oblique border of the heart and then comes down this way. This is what we see. This is the left phrenic nerve, this is the right phrenic nerve. Now because this artery around where the pericardium is, they are around the pericardium. So pericardiacophrenic artery. So whatever the phrenic nerve is supplying, these arteries also supply. Yes. So if you remember last week, I told you that the diaphragm doesn't only have motor function, but also has sensory function. Okay? The mediastinal pleura, we talk about diaphragmatic peritoneum. Yes, all those things, we mentioned those things, pericardium, fibrous pericardium and all that. We said those things. For this reason, this artery, which will also be running with it, the pericardiacophrenic, will also be giving off branches to it. So what are those branches? It will be giving off some branches towards the pleura, okay, or towards the mediastinal branches, okay, then also to the pericardial branches, okay, even to this diaphragmatic peritoneum, okay, to the diaphragm. These are the things that will be the supply of what we call the pericardiacal phrenic artery. It's as simple as that. Whatever diaphragm is supplying, or phrenic nerve is supplying, the diaphragm itself, okay, talk about the fibrous pericardium, talk about the mediastinal pleura, okay, have the pleura over the mediastinal pleura to be supplying it. That is what we are going to see. Now, finally, the last thing which I want you to become aware, and this is something that usually some students get confused, they often ask me, and the fact that although we have some intercostal arteries, they are intercostal arteries, but they go on and supply the abdominal muscle. So why? And this is where I want to introduce you to one concept, that we have two kinds of intercostal nerves. Two kinds of intercostal nerves. Yes, we have the typical intercostal nerves and we have atypical intercostal nerves. Now, this is worth explaining to you, okay, so that you understand this concept. So we have typical and atypical intercostal nerves. I am talking about intercostal nerves. For the intercostal nerves, you are going to have 11 intercostal nerves. They are paired. No problem with that. Now, from the ventral rami of the various spinal nerve levels, we are going to have these intercostal nerves. Okay, T1 all the way to T11. But some of them are typical, some of them are atypical. Before I come to the typical ones, let's see the atypical ones. So the first atypical one is the first intercostal nerve, T1. It is atypical. Now, why is it atypical? For the reason that it contributes, it's an important contributor to something we call the brachial plexus. Brachial plexus. Now, those of you, if this is the first time of you hearing brachial plexus, I've done videos on them. But one thing is that the brachial plexus will not only give motor supply to muscles of course, the upper limb, that of the thoracic region, the joints around, but also sensory supply, okay, to the skin around these areas. Yes. So it means that because they are not solely supply region of the, intercostal space, then they become atypical. Because the definition of typical intercostal nerve is that because they course in the intercostal space only, they don't supply any other thing apart from the intercostal space only, the structure in that space only. But those ones which are atypical, apart from supplying the intercostal space, they go on and supply other things. Why? Because they don't course in this intercostal space only. So one of them is this T1. Why? Because it contributes to something we call the brachial plexus. Brachial. And I'm sure that you know that the brachial plexus, from the ventral rami of C5 all the way to, of course, T1. That's a normal thing, although there are variations. Now the next one is T2. The T2, the second intercostal nerve itself, is also atypical. Why? Because it contributes to something we call intercostal brachial nerve. Forms this intercostal brachial nerve. Intercostal means it supplies the intercostal space, but it doesn't end there. Brachial got to do with the arm. So especially, okay, the cutaneous sensation, okay, supply to, of course, the lateral aspect of this, chest region, pectoral region, lateral aspect of the pectoral region, medial aspect of this portion of the arm, the upper portion, and also the axillary region. That is why in an exam, if I paint this area of the axillary region and I ask you the dermatome of this one, I'll be teaching you the dermatome so that you can understand visceral pain and all that. Then you know that I'm looking at what you call the T2. So this is T2, intercostal brachial nerve. Why? Because supplying all these things. So it fails to become a typical intercostal nerve. Now I go to T7 to T11. T7 to T11. Also atypical. Why? Because for those of you who have read something on the abdomen, you see that these trilaminar and abdominal wall muscles, mainly, their supply will be coming from T7 to T11. Okay? That is why we call these ones thoraco-abdominal nerves. Thoraco-abdominal nerves. Thoraco in that in the thoracic region, intercostal space supplying, but doesn't end there. It goes on to the wall of the abdomen. So these ones, they also become atypical intercostal nerves. Now, well, some people may write T12, but T12 is not an intercostal nerve. But let me put it down. Why is it it's not an intercostal nerve? Why? Because it can be below rib number 12. And we don't have rib number 13, so it doesn't become, an intercostal nerve. Because it's below a rib, and rib is costal, we say subcostal nerve. This is a subcostal nerve. So it is, not even part of the intercostal nerves in the first place. It also goes on to supply these, some of these, what do you call it? Abdominal wall muscles, for example, pyramidalis muscle. Okay, we get to supply from this one after going through what you call the rectus sheath, these ones. So these guys, they are atypical for the reason explained. Now then the question is, how about the typical intercostal nerves? How about those ones? Yes, and so if you look through, then it can do the subtraction and addition. So it tells you that T3 to, of course, T6. Just these alone become what we call the typical intercostal nerves. Typical intercostal nerves. Why? Because they cause in the intercostal space only, and therefore they supply only structures in the intercostal space, nothing else. They don't go beyond that. My friends, I hope you find it helpful. I'll be looking at all these important bits, okay, for you to really understand the concept. I'm very grateful for your time this evening. Have a good night, all of you, and may the good Lord richly bless you. Amen.